The first guy, the newest guy, drives. The second guy takes the shotgun and he goes inside the door of the bank. Then the two guys that have pistols, they go in the bank and they jump over the counter, and then they take the money. And when they do it, they have a bag over their head with the bag open like this. So when they take the money, they grab the money and they turn it. When they grab the money, they turn it this way so you can see the red dye pack or you can feel it. So right here, here's an interesting story. See right here?
Yeah.
This used to be the Celtic Tavern right here. And I can't tell you the kid's name because they never solved the case. But this was during the Irish gang, during the Code of Silence murders. And what happened was a kid gets shot and killed in there, and they dump him on the sidewalk. And as they're dumping him on the sidewalk, there's a police cruiser going around the rotary. So the police officer goes around the rotary again, right? And there's 29 people across the street in the bus stop. And they grabbed all 29 people and they interviewed all 29. And all 29 people were in the bathroom at the time of the shooting. And the only problem was it was a one-stall bathroom.
Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, I have just one story for you. But it is the stories of a retired Boston police detective.
I saw how you do it, and then you put your picture in there somehow.
Yeah, it's me just talking to
You're
the
a lot
camera.
taller than you look.
Oh, thank you. A few months ago, I was traveling around Massachusetts, and I was lucky enough to meet with a retired Boston detective named Joe Lehman, a man with decades of service to his city, and a guy who has seen everything, all of Boston's darkest secrets. And these days, he runs tours of Boston, telling the stories of Boston's most dark and disturbing crimes. Though retired, I guess a cop never really retires, as when he's not showing people the dark side of the city, he's working as a private detective. To say Joe knows crime and investigation, understatement. He was kind enough to take me on this ride along through the city, tell me about its dark history, of cases he had worked on as a member of the Boston Police Department, and we talked a little bit about its current state.
Boston is known for its sports, known for its politics. And I truly believe it's known for its crime too.
Yeah.
Certain things about like going back to the old Irish gang wars, and there's this infatuation with Whitey Bulger.
Right.
During the Irish gang wars, 70 people were killed during the Irish gang wars, from 61 to 75.
So that's the who, what, why, where, when. Now, how about we get into it? Let's give it a go.
The city is for some glamorous, stimulating, prosperous. Only recently has it become dangerous. 5 young girls have been strangled in the Boston area in little over a year. The stranglings have become the chief topic of conversation between housewives on the telephone, co-eds between classes, and secretaries during coffee breaks.
I grew up in Boston, everything like that, and being in the military and being a police officer, you kind of size people up all the time. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I worked for the Boston Police for 35 years, so it was interesting. I actually got in trouble when I was a kid in Charlestown, where I grew up, in a little bit of trouble, and actually it was probably a blessing in disguise because I ended up going in the military. I was a police officer, I was a detective, I was a sergeant, lieutenant. When I was a police officer, I was in the drug unit for about 7 years.
Really?
And I loved it, actually. I worked undercover.
This is Joe Lehman, a veteran detective of the Boston Police Force, recently retired. Today, he runs Boston Detective Tours, which I could not more highly recommend. If you're in the city, you gotta go. It's about a 90-minute tour of Boston, with Joe telling you the stories of the city. From Boston's role as the birthplace of the American Revolution to dark history, such as the Boston Strangler, when 13 women were killed in the city during the early 1960s. Committed by Albert DeSalvo. Maybe.
So when they went up there, she was found sexually assaulted, and she was strangled to death.
To crimes he himself helped solve, from kidnappings to murders to bank robberies.
I look at the iPad and I see the GPS and I see them coming. They're up in Salem, Mass. And I'm like, where the witches are. I'm like, what are they doing up there? So I look, they're in a mall. I called the Salem police. I said, you guys got something going on up there? They're like, yeah, we just got broken into. They stole the safe.
A guy who has seen it all, done it all, if it's in law enforcement. including his days as an undercover cop working drugs.
So I had a lot of people, like I had this thing with, remember beepers? Remember what a beeper was?
Yeah.
So that was my bug. You know what I mean? That was a microphone. So I put the bug kind of like this underneath the other shirt. Yeah. Like a V-neck shirt, it would be right there. Right. And I would talk as I'm walking, like like out in the street. I was more concerned out in the street with the guys that were, you know, selling me drugs out there, because I was afraid they were going to stab me. But the only thing was, I was always in contact. Like say I was at, like say at the Boston Commons, I was in the Commons. There was people all around me, like police officers. Oh, okay. You know, in plain clothes. Right. And I would talk it through, and then so say it, you know, lead me around. I'd be like, whatever. So once I gave them the money, and they gave me the drugs, I would take my hat off.
That's the signal.
Signal that the deal's done. You can go in and lock them up. I actually worked undercover. I had 75 undercover buys.
75.
75. It was actually mostly crack cocaine and heroin, and but they would also send me into bar rooms, and because they said I would fit in. They'd send me to bar rooms to buy powdered coke. Okay. And you know, go in and drink. They said that I'd fit in the bar rooms. Yeah. They actually sent me undercover in horse race, Suffolk Downs, and there was a guy in there that was selling drugs, basically powdered coke and pills. And I'm in there, and it's so funny. It's like they would give me money to gamble, drink, and buy drugs. You know what I mean? It was great. So I knew the target guy was over there, and I'd watch him all the time. And obviously I always had another corner of my eye. He'd sit at the table. He'd either sell drugs at the table. They'd sit down, make the deal, and they'd take off. But if they went into the bathroom, I would call it out. So once they came out, I would call on my phone. I'd call to the guys out in the parking lot, say, yeah, guy with the red hand just bought. He's coming out. Take him off. So it was interesting. So one night I'm sitting there and I'm like watching the monitor. I'm like, okay, you know, betting on the 5 horse. You know what I mean?
Having a great time.
Out of the corner of my eye, I see a kid from Charlestown, where I grew up, talking to the main guy. And I swear to God, I read their lips. It was like they pointed over me and said, hey, who's that guy over there? The kid from Charlestown. I was like, oh, that's Joey Lehman. He's a cop down District 7.
No.
So that was the end of my career at Suffolk Downs.
I've told a fair few crime stories from this city. Philip Markoff, the Craigslist killer. The abduction and murder of Amy Lord. Karina Halmer, the Swedish au pair who went out clubbing one night in downtown 1996. She was later found in a dumpster right here. Well, half of her was. Her other half has never been found, and the case was never solved. And of course, the insane ongoing cases of both Karen Reid and Anna Walsh. But one story that Joe himself worked on, and a reason I was so keen to speak with him to begin with, is that he was directly a part of the case of Clark Rockefeller. Joe even made a little cameo in my video. How are you, Joe? To give you a quick rundown, the story of Clark went a little something like this. He was a German guy who moved to the States back in 1978 and soon began assuming multiple identities, always among the rich and famous. He was a long-time bullshit artist. While living in California, one young couple that were onto his tricks ended up going on an extended vacation to Europe, where, interestingly, no one ever saw them again. They did send postcards home, postcards written in someone else's handwriting. Clark ended up in Boston, marrying and having a kid, all built upon a lie, of course. When he was close to being found out, he kidnapped his own daughter.
So I get the call for the kid. I get the call. I'm a new detective. I show up down here. I gather a little bit of information. I quickly go over to Four Seasons to talk to the wife. When I talk to the wife, I'm like, you know, I'm trying to get information from him. I'm like, well, what's his name? Where's he live? What's his phone number? And she's like, he isn't who he says he is. I'm like, what do you mean he isn't who he says he is? And then she relays the information about her father doing the investigation, and you know, he is finding out.
Another famous Boston case is what Charles Chuck Stuart did to his wife and unborn child. In 1989, 31-year-old Chuck Stuart was managing an upscale fur clothing store in Back Bay. He was, on the surface, happily married to 31-year-old Carol Stuart, and she was pregnant with their first child. A week before Halloween, 1989, the couple attended a childbirthing class at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And then, well, Joe, take it away.
1989. This is what Stuart said. He said that he was, him and his wife were leaving birthing class at Brigham Women's Hospital. And when they came out, they were carjacked by a black male with a raspy voice. that stole their money, jewelry, and shot them both.
Yeah.
Then they located them. So.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot.
Where is this, sir?
I have no idea. I'm off. I've been coming from Tremont, Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Where are you right now, sir? Can you indicate to me?
No, I don't know. He made us go to an abandoned area.
Okay, sir. Can you see out the windows? Can you tell me where you are, please?
No. I don't know. I don't see any signs. Oh, God.
Are you near Brigham and Women's Hospital?
No, we went straight through.
What kind of car do you have, sir?
Pardon me?
What kind of vehicle do you have?
Toyota Cressida.
Toyota Cressida.
She had a substantial amount of injury to her head and was in cardiac arrest at that time.
We drop this and spin it, please. Get him on this. Put your hands right on your chest. Go ahead. Stretcher's not in there, Captain. That's all right. Pull it right up. Take care of my wife. Yeah, but tell me that people taking care of her.
He was saying, you know, take care of my wife, how's my wife? And I didn't know how his wife was. I suspected that she was seriously injured and that she was in worse condition than he was.
Long story short, that's not what happened.
Yeah.
So Matthew Stuart, Charles Stewart's brother, went to the authorities and told them that his brother Charles instructed him to go to the scene of the crime, pick up the bag containing the money and the jewelry and the gun, and throw it in the river out in Revere.
It's things like that happen to a lot of people, and you just never think it's going to happen to you, and it's reality right to the face, you know, and that's just the way it is.
But that's not the way it was. Shortly after he picked a suspect out of a lineup, Stewart's bizarre tale began to unravel. He became the suspect after his brother Matthew, reportedly driven by a guilty conscience, went to the police.
One of the first cases I was involved with as a radio repairman, so,
Yeah.
and I went out there with the command post and with, you know, bag phones. And a bag phone, you know, nobody had phones. I took the bag phone out to the bridge so people could communicate.
Yeah.
And they ended up, getting the bag and everything. And then once Chuck Stewart found out that Matthew Stewart went to the authorities, he jumped off the 12 bridge. So
That's crazy.
So the motive was Chuck Stewart, his money, obviously. He had a life insurance policy, but Chuck Stewart was having an affair with a girl.
Right.
At his work. He worked at Cactus Furs on Newbury Street.
Right, yeah.
And he was having an affair, and he had told family and friends that he didn't want to be married anymore.
Didn't want a kid.
And he obviously had an insurance policy, but he jumped off the bridge January 4th, 1990. And when he jumped off he had a colostomy bag, so he wasn't in good shape.
Oh, wow.
But he did a lot. It did a lot. You know, obviously, I grew up during the desegregation of schools, forced busing. So I grew up in a tough time here in Boston, and so it didn't do a lot of good for
I heard
race relations.
Being in Boston, I wanted to get more into the nitty-gritty, you know, the real stuff Joe himself had seen. The dark history, the mystery, and the murder. Thankfully, Joe had a number of his own stories. And by a number, that number is big. So, who better to learn about its dark history than from someone who was not only born and raised in Bank Robber Central.
You know, I grew up in Charlestown. Charlestown was like it was like crazy going up there in the 70s. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but if you ever watch the movie The Town, at the beginning it says Charlestown, the bank robbery capital of the United States. And back in the 1970s, there were a lot of people robbing banks.
And yes, folks, he has stories, but as much as I was interested in hearing about these stories of the city and the ones he'd worked on, Joe himself was equally as an interesting guy, and I had to learn about why he became what he did, what it's like to be a detective in a major city, and has it changed much?
I was in the drug unit for 7 years. I was a detective for 5 years. It was the best job because the way I explain it is like, so when I was a patrolman and when I was a sergeant, I would go home, and in uniform, I would go home and tell my wife stories. Like growing up in Charlestown, being in the military, just, you think you see it all. Do you know what I mean? You think you see it all. Then you get another case, and like, I'd go home, tell my wife the story. She said, "You wouldn't believe what happened today." I'd tell her the story. So the next day I'd go home, she'd say, "Hey, that story, that guy, what happened to him?" I'm like, "I don't know, I went home." You know what I mean? Because when you're a police officer or sergeant, 7:30 to 4, 4 to 11:45, you're gone, and then it's somebody else's problem after that. With a detective, for instance, right here, Rockefeller, you show up, it's your case.
Right.
It's your
Till it's
case till
done.
it's solved or not solved or whatever, but it always sticks with you. And I love that. It was very like, I love the chase. You know, it's almost like when I was a kid getting chased. You know what I mean? It's like just the opposite. Now I'm chasing. You know what I mean? It's just so interesting to like, and you had the resources obviously as a detective. You know, like obviously, it's so funny. Like when I was the whole time I was a detective, I can count on one hand how many times I caught somebody with fingerprints.
Really?
It was all blood. It was all blood and DNA. You know, say
of course.
D&As and everything, and then sure enough, we'd recover the blood at a breaking and entering or a robbery or a sexual thing.
Yeah.
And 9 months later, it would come back. You know, DNA.
Got him.
DNA, we got him. Yes.
Nailed him.
I was actually Detective of the Year back in 2012.
Oh man, that's
And
awesome.
It was a case involving safes. There was a bunch of crew from South Boston they were breaking into restaurants and bars, and they were stealing safes. So the way it came about, just same thing. Saturday morning, you show up, breaking into a restaurant, you get down, the safe's gone. So we had a crew from South Boston. They were stealing safes and they were breaking into the restaurants and bars. So they would be in and out. I'm like, you know what? It's got to be an inside job. Not necessarily that it was a person from, you know, inside the place, but obviously. So what I did was I called all the purveyors for all the restaurants. Then I got all the delivery drivers. Then I ran their records. And then I cross-referenced everything.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of like how I
Right,
came
yeah.
about getting it. I loved it. I really did. It was so much fun. You know what I mean? It's like, so I investigated everybody from like, I had cases involving Tom Brady.
Tom Brady? No shit.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
What would you say was like the most satisfying part for you of being?
You know, I had a couple of cases actually. I had a couple firsts. Like I had a case that involved in 2012. The state of Massachusetts changed the human trafficking statute.
Yeah.
And what they did was they made the obviously sentencing more, you know, more stronger or anything like that. But there was, like I said, they changed the statute. I had a case involving 2 girls, and like I told you before, like when you get a case, like for instance, Saturday morning I get a call for the city hospital. I get down to the city hospital, and there's 2 girls down there that were beaten up, and I'm not judging them by any ways. They were homeless, they were drug addicts, and they were you know, they were being used by these 2 guys.
Yeah.
So anyways, I get there. And I convinced them, you know, they got beaten up. I convinced them to give me some information in order to start the investigation. Then we started our investigation. And these 2 guys, like I say, they were, you know, they were using the girls. They were actually paying them with McDonald's and heroin.
Jesus.
You know, for the day. And obviously, then they were raping them, and they were obviously having guys meet with them to have sex. And
right.
So it was pretty bad. So anyways, we end up getting the 2 guys. We end up going to trial, and they went to trial, and they were found guilty. Yeah. But the only thing is, when we went to trial, it was more difficult having these 2 girls because they were drug addicts. We were trying to get them into the courtroom to testify. In the long run, actually, it was pretty good. The 2 guys, they're 2 very bad guys. One guy is a terrible guy, but the other guy, they end up getting 17 years. 17 years for
That's
doing
good.
this. And like I say, it was the first conviction under the new human trafficking law. Definitely things that I've seen that bother me still. You know what I mean? Like I've seen a lot of death and and I never once So when I was a detective, and I was a sergeant. So say when you're a detective, anything that comes in, any death investigation. Yeah. I don't care if it's grandma or whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah. If somebody's dead, we have to go to make sure that there's no foul play. So I've seen, a lot of suicides and a lot of, gunshots and people like that have been there for a while. And some things you'd rather not. Yeah, I'd rather not see it, but it was my job. I truly enjoyed it. It was a good job. Like I was there at the right time. You know what I mean? It was like it was awesome. Like especially when I was in the drug unit, I was there for 7 years, and we did a lot of good work. We helped a lot of people. I was there during the OxyContin.
When that was exploding.
Yeah, I saw a lot of young kids screwed up on the oxys.
When it became like a pandemic.
Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah, and obviously I have a soft spot in my heart for women, and obviously I've seen a lot of young girls messed up on the OxyContins, and pretty young girls, and the families were devastated. As bad as I felt bad for them, I felt bad for the families.
As cities go, Boston, it's remarkably clean, remarkably safe. However, Boston has its own problems, like any city anywhere in the world does. Boston's is called Mass and Cass.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously, it's tough to live here as far as financially. You know, it's very expensive to live here.
Yeah.
And we have some beefs. I have some beefs obviously as far as like I believe in if you can look it up as far as people talk about it, like the broken windows theory as far as I truly believe that if you let those little
the little ones go,
eventually it's going to get worse. And I truly believe in that, but they don't want to enforce that. Well, we have a place down here. I don't know if you've ever seen Mass and Cass.
I've heard about it. I haven't been there.
We have to go.
Really?
We have to go.
Okay.
Yeah, because and I hate to say it, but it's kind of disturbing. And I'm going to be honest with you. I blame the politicians because that case. Remember the case I told you about the human trafficking?
Yeah.
That started That was 9 years ago. That started down Mass and Cass.
Oh. Wow.
So that's where, and that's wait till you see it. You're going to be shocked. It's like what happens is because the city of Boston, the state of Massachusetts, they provide these people that have problems with the resources. So everybody flocks to Boston. Okay. Wait till you see this place. It's like they give them there's all kinds of resources there for them. Believe me, I'm 100% for these people to get help because they're homeless. Yeah. They have substance abuse issues. They have mental health issues, and they need help. But the city needs to do a better job. The city and the state need to do a better job as far as helping these people. Yeah. They're spending a lot of money. Yeah. They're spending a lot of money trying to help these people, but they need to do more. So right here, this is where all the hospitals are. Oh, so from here, heading all the ways back to where I live, South Boston, is it's called Methadone Mile. This intersection here is Mass and Cass. Right over here, all kidding aside, just be careful when you're filming and everything like that. I'm not gonna let anything happen to you.
Mass and Cass, also known as Methadone Mile or Recovery Road, is the intersection of Melnia Cass Boulevard and Massachusetts Avenue near Boston's South End, a place that has for many years attracted the homeless and those with drug addictions, described as the epicenter of the region's opioid addiction crisis. There have been many attempts to try and clean it up, but each and every time, people returned with violent incidents and emergency calls to the area slowly rising. Shortly after filming this, in November 2023, the tents were removed from the Mass and Cass area, and the police presence around there is still strong, as the plan is to keep it that way. Many of the people that had been in those tents did receive shelter and assistance from the city, and the others, well, out of sight, out of mind. It seems like things have improved in the area, but for how long and where else the problem is today, well, that's an issue for tomorrow.
I spoke to people who live here in the South End, and they say taking the tents down has actually made the problem worse on residential streets, but people working with the city say they had no choice but to clear the encampment.
Things. Yeah. I mean, I was telling you guys earlier how, like, I had in District 4, I had everything from I investigated Tom Brady, cases with Tom Brady. I investigated multimillionaires, poor people. They have my District 4. You had all the hospitals, all the schools, all the beautiful homes, all the all the housing developments. Yeah. I got a funny story to tell you. I don't know if I think about it, but it was July 4th. Oh, nice. And I was waiting at the station. So I was actually stopped by my house for lunch. I had like 25 people at my house having a barbecue, and I'm at work. 2:30, we get a call for a guy shot in the housing development. Yeah. We go down there, and it's July 4th. It's like beautiful out. There's 1,000 people in the housing development, and the kid shot right near the flagpole. Big guy.
Was he was gone?
Yeah. Well, no. So anyways, we pull up, and they're cutting the shirts off him right here. Right. He's shot like about 4 or 5 times right here. God. Wow. So we come up to him, we say, buddy, who did it? He's like, fuck you. Take me to the hospital. I'm like, dude, you're not going to make it. Who shot you? He said, fuck you. Take me to the hospital. We took him to the hospital, and he died. God damn. We died. They brought him right in. They cut him. They split him open, and they saw it. And I was there, and the doctor came out. And I said, Doc, I obviously had to get his name and what's going on. He said, we're bringing him up to surgery right now, but dude, he's not going to make it.
The 2010 movie The Tent states at the beginning that there are over 300 bank robberies in Boston every year. Which, I'm not sure there are even 300 banks in Boston. In fact, the year this movie came out, which is 2010, there was 170 bank robberies. That's in the entire state of Massachusetts. In 2018, there was 70. Again, that's the entire state, and fairly big drop there, lads. But yeah, go back a few decades, it rings sorta close to the truth. Today, Charlestown is very pretty, an upper-class neighborhood. But back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, when Joe would have been growing up, it was a rough with a big old R Irish-American neighborhood. One of the most famous bank robbers was Anthony Shea, who, along with his no-name gang, robbed countless armoured cars before it came crashing to an end in 1994, when 2 security men guarding the truck were killed, it's believed, after they saw their faces. Joe grew up surrounded by these guys and knew exactly how it worked, in a strictly academic way, of course.
I had friends that robbed banks as kids.
Really?
Growing up, yeah.
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 Like kids.
Kids.
Robbery.
And when I say kids, I'm talking 17, 18, 19,
And they're going
20 years old.
banks.
So I'll never forget, like, when I look back and I think about it, and then we used to sit around talking, and we'd sit around. So I don't know, you know, it is back in Ireland or whatever. Everybody chips in $5 for a bunch of beers. Then you go down near the water and drink the beers for the night and have a good night.
Absolutely.
So some nights we didn't have to do that because one of my friends would rob a bank earlier in the day.
Oh my God.
So we would sit there, and I swear to God, there's a couple of friends I had, I would sit there and talk, and they would explain how, I would ask in detail how it happened. So this is the way it happened.
Taking notes.
Yeah.
Do bank robber beers taste better than regular beers?
Yeah, it's free. So what happens is, let me explain how the bank robbery thing goes. So 4 or 5 guys, right, a car. So the first guy, the newest guy, drives. The second guy takes the shotgun and he goes inside the door of the bank. Then the 2 guys that have pistols, they go in the bank and they jump over the counter, and then they take the money. And when they do it, they have a bag over their head with the bag open like this. So when they take the money, they grab the money and they turn it. When they grab the money, they turn it this way so you can see the red dye pack or you can feel it. If there's a red dye pack, you throw it to the ground and grab another bunch, and you go like this. So when they leave, this is very interesting. This is on my tour too. Is when they leave, it's usually a Jeep Cherokee, but they usually use a van, just like the movie The Town.
Yeah.
Usually a van with the sliding doors and it's open, and the door. So then they take off and they jump in. These are guys with have guns, so they jump in the car and they take off, and they might go a block or 2. And then they turn onto a street, leave the car in the middle of the street, and then they leapfrog to another car. And the car they usually leapfrog is to a Jeep Cherokee. And the reason they take the Jeep Cherokee is usually the second or third car is because that way they can jump over sidewalks and get away from the police. So when I see pictures of my friends, like obviously when we were kids growing up, like 17, 18, 19 years old, and then I think about like the guys that did it, and them jumping over the counters, like 18 years old, and they look like babies when they're 18 years old. Could you imagine a poor bank teller? Like when you see this little kid jumping, like a little monkey jumping over the counter.
That's like I was just putting.
And they did good. They did pretty good. They did actually pretty good with their, how much money they got.
Yeah.
Back then.
Nice, I'm sure we all took some notes there, folks. But as a townie, Joe wasn't just surrounded by banks constantly being robbed, he helped stop some himself.
See the bank right there?
Yeah.
Obviously, this is where I lived. Obviously, right here. So, this is my bank robbery store. So there's the bank. That's where I grew up. So I'm up sitting in my car. I'm sipping a cup of coffee, and I'm reading the paper. Call comes in for a bank robbery. I'm like, right there. I'm like, oh shit. I throw it in drive. I fly down Meade Street. When I come down Meade Street, I fly down Main Street. When I start flying towards the bank, I see a police officer running down Main Street chasing a kid by gunpoint.
Whoa.
So I fly down, I jump on the sidewalk, I fly up the sidewalk, and I slam on the brakes. When I slam on the brakes, they both go like this. They're both like...
The cop as well?
Yeah. So, and then when I jumped out of the car, the guy recognized, Mark Assad, he was a detective, he recognized me. He said, Joe, get some cuffs, throw some cuffs on him. I jump out, we tackle him, we get him on the ground, we handcuff him, we get the money. It's several $1,000s in several $1,000, $50 bills.
Okay.
Oh, right.
No, he has no gun. Right when we handcuff him, the cops show up, they take him away. And I said to Mark, I said, you should have seen your face when I pulled up on the sidewalk. I said, did you think I was one of the bad guys coming up his friend? He said, Joe, I did. But then I saw your police ticket book up on the dashboard. So he says, it's got to be a cop. A couple things I like to point out. So when we get the kid back to the station, we take his mask off. It's a kid from Charlestown I know here who is a nice kid. He just ran into a problem with drugs, heroin. He didn't have a gun. I grew up with his older brother who was a bank robber, who used guns to rob banks. Yeah. And so it's interesting. So the funny part was he made it right to this white door over here.
Yeah.
And obviously almost right across the street from the bank. His mother lived in elderly housing over there. So he made it. He figured, he was hard up for heroin.
Yeah.
He wanted to get high, and he had to get high. And he just made it there. That's quick. So the couple things I point out about.
But Charlestown, this little neighborhood north of Boston, full of townies to you and me, it's the townies of Charleston and the toonies of, well, everywhere else. It was also famous for its gang violence of days gone by, the stuff you'd see in The Departed or really any Boston Irish gangster movie. I love those movies, but that sort of thing just doesn't really exist anymore. And for good reason. Makes a good movie, but also makes a pretty dangerous place to live. Charlestown, as much for its bank robberies, is probably even more famous for the gang wars of the 60s and 70s. Even if you don't know much about the gangs, you probably know the name Whitey Bulger. Arguably the most famous gangster to come out of the city, he was a member of and later led the infamous Winter Hill Gang for about 20 years, taking over the South Boston Gang after all the other key members were arrested in a horse-fixing scam. They went on to control all of South Boston, and it's believed Whitey Bulger was responsible for at minimum 11 murders. And for most of those years, while leading a gang, he was also, on the side, working as an informant for the FBI. In 1994, he went on the run and remained at large for 16 long-ass years, even being on the FBI's most wanted list before being arrested in California in 2011. He was later very, and I mean very violently beaten to death in prison in 2018. Also in Charlestown were the Code of Silence murders, which, folks, I would tell you more about, but, well, I mean, the clue's in the name. Named so because Charlestown residents were famous for not talking to the police. They, for good or ill, looked after their own.
So what was Charleston like back when you were growing up?
So it's kind of crazy, actually. So I'm glad you said that. So I told you about the Irish gang wars between 1961 and 1975. 70 people killed. I don't know if I told you how it started, but the way it started was Georgie McLaughlin of the Charlestown gang. He was hanging out with members of the Winter Hill gang up in Salisbury Beach on the New Hampshire border. And when he was up there, they were drinking, obviously, and Georgie had a little bit too much to drink, so he grabbed one of the girls from the Winter Hill gang inappropriately, and they beat him up. And when they beat him up, they almost killed him, and they dumped him off at the hospital. So the next day, Bernie McLaughlin, the head of the Charlestown gang, went to the head of the Winter Hill gang, Buddy McLean, and said he wanted the two people that beat up his brother killed.
Whoa, Jesus.
Buddy McLean refused. The next day, Bernie McLaughlin put a bomb underneath Buddy McLean's car.
Oh, wow.
However, they detected it before it went off. So the very next day, Buddy McLean and another guy went to Charlestown, right at City Square, and Bernie McLaughlin was killed in broad daylight. In broad daylight, in front of 100 people, and nobody saw anything.
Mother of God.
But nobody.
Of course, yeah.
So that was the start of the Irish gang wars. That was the first homicide involved.
That was the first. It was just I started off like.
It started out from a guy grabbing a girl's ass.
Grabbing her ass. Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez, and then that war then went on for like what, 14 years?
No, it went from 61 to 75. More. It was pretty much done by about the 70s.
Yeah.
But there was trickle effects afterwards. But for the most part, the killings happened from 61 to about. So by 1968, the Charlestown gang was all done. But there was more things besides the Charlestown gang. So
okay.
There was Winter Hill. So the Winter Hill gang basically won. And then from 68, 65, Buddy McLean was killed. And that's what I was telling you the story. Howie Winters took over until 1979, when everybody from the Winter Hill gang got arrested on a horse race fixing scam.
Yeah.
And that's when Whitey Bulger took over for the Winter Hill gang.
And so you were growing up like surrounded by a lot of this.
I didn't know it at the time. I was basically a young kid.
Okay.
But then from 1975 to 1990, now that was the Irish gang wars wasn't just Charlestown. It was Charlestown versus Winter Hill, but like the killings were all over Boston. In 1975 to 1990 in Charlestown, we had the Code of Silence murders, where 49 people were killed 49 people in Charlestown alone were killed. and obviously the Court of Silence murders, because not a lot of the cases were solved because nobody said anything.
Right, yeah, nobody wants to.
So I grew up in that era, like during the Court of Silence.
Did they ever try to like recruit you or anything?
No, but you know what, so I like to say, like, I got in a little bit of trouble, and let me see. I don't have my picture with me.
What can you legally say?
Yeah. This guy right here is actually head of the, what used to be the Irish Mafia. Yeah, with Whitey Bulger, yeah, my next door neighbor.
He's your next door man.
Great guy.
Do you ever have any weird conversations with these people who've been like,
well,
we used to be cops and robbers?
Well, you know what I'm surprised at? If you look on the internet now, like I watch these, interviews with like, all the Italian guys.
Yeah.
And they're very forthcoming about what they did. Yeah, remember I told you about growing up in Charlestown?
Yeah.
He's not a bad guy.
Right.
And so all that stuff was, 60s and 70s. Is there still like a mob Irish gang presence in the city?
No, there isn't. No, not at all. There's no Irish mob, no Italian mob. There might be a couple people that think they are.
Boston is an incredible city. If you like true crime, horror, basically any of the same stuff I do, and, well, I mean, if you're watching this, I'll take that as a yes. Its history and stories run deep, and I've only scratched the surface of Boston's darkest crimes and secrets. And though today it has its share of problems, but the same as any city it really has, its history is one of the most fascinating anywhere in the world. A city that has seen a lot, much like Joe, but came out the other side tougher, more resilient, and always with a joke.
So I'm telling him the story. I said, that's my bank robbery story. He says to me, Joe, can I tell you something? He says, that was like one of the best stories I ever heard. I said, you know what? I wish it was true.
Thank you so much for watching this little video. It really means a lot. I hope you found it interesting. A huge shout out, thank you to Joe Lehman. He's great. Please check out, if you're ever in Boston area, check out his tours. They rock. I went on it myself. They're really, really good. And yeah, here, listen, folks. Next little video will be up in a couple of days, so I look forward to that. But until then, please take care of each other and yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.